I think when we discuss freedom, a point that we very easily forget is that freedom is a very dangerous, a very, very risky kind of ideal. People often think about freedom as something that you receive on a piece of paper, like a postcard. And when you receive it, you're then able to enjoy it because that freedom that's on a piece of paper guarantees your rights. But we know that that's not the way it works, because one of the things that we've learned is that most of the time, although we take our freedoms for granted and we like our freedom, nevertheless, we're also aware of the fact that freedom is a very dangerous, risky kind of ideal. When we're able to be genuinely free, and when we're able to make our own decisions and act in accordance with our inclinations, you really never know what the outcome will be. One of the things about freedom is that it's a bit like a journey, except it's the kind of journey that doesn't have any clear, specific sort of stopping points that you can get off from and hope that that will be the end of it. Because freedom, when you exercise it, interacts with the freedom of other people, and it creates a dynamic whose consequences can never be anticipated in advance. And that's why you'll find that a lot of the time, a lot of people would rather not exercise their freedom. A lot of the time, people will tell you, oh, it's much better when we know what kind of decisions we should be making, but we don't have to choose and act in accordance with our freely established inclinations. It's much better if we just simply do what people say. And it's very interesting that one of the criticisms that's been made of not just this government, but a lot of other governments during COVID, is that they are not telling us what needs to be done. They are not really giving us clear guidelines about how we should cope with the pandemic. And it's almost, you get the impression when you listen to particularly the British media, that there's a constant demand for, please, please, micromanage us, please tell us how to behave, tell us how to, how to respond to things as they evolve. And whenever you're not getting that kind of guidance, people get really, really frightened. And our media and our culture encourages us, people to become very passive about their freedom and look to other people to give them guidance. Now, the thing about freedom, and the reason why freedom is not just another word, aside from the fact that it's very, very dangerous, is that all too often, although we say, yes, I believe in freedom, we tend to be very casual about taking it seriously. And very often, the same people that declare their commitment to freedom will then say, well, in some circumstances, maybe freedom is not the last word. Maybe freedom is not really what we should be doing. So, for example, we often hear about the fact that during the present pandemic, we need to think about a trade-off between our safety as people from the threat of COVID and our freedom to behave in accordance with our inclinations. People, for example, who say that they would like to manage this pandemic freely, and they would like to decide for themselves how they live their lives, all told, well, your freedom is all very well, but it's threatening our safety. So you get this idea that somehow, in some circumstances, freedom becomes a second order value, something that's subordinate to something that is really much more important, which is that of safety. All the while forgetting that the idea that you can be safe without being free is the kind of safety that one usually associates with being slaves or being in a prison, where you're very safe because you're caged in, but you certainly aren't free, and that the value of that safety means very little in a sense. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, that I'm just using a very bad analogy, just think of the ways in which, when people tell us that safety is most important, undermines the way that we lead our life and live in a general kind of sense. I think that the safety COVID trade-off is very similar when people tell us that our freedom is threatened by the fact that it offends people, that if we speak too freely, if we speak too harshly, it's going to have very negative consequences for people down the line. So we're often told that in order to protect people from offense, we must limit our right to free speech. And therefore, in those circumstances, the right not to be offended trumps my freedom. Freedom just becomes another word under those kinds of circumstances. And time again, I encounter arguments which continually argue, oh, it's not just the right not to be offended that's more important than freedom. It's also freedom from sort of danger, and also public health is also much more important than being free. So the point I'm really trying to get at is that, in a sense, in all these situations where freedom is kind of put forward as something you can negotiate away, as being not that important, we're kind of tested. We as citizens are tested to what extent we are holding freedom as something that is sacred to us, rather than something that we can give away in this or that kind of circumstances. Because unless we do that, unless there are enough of us who hold freedom as a sacred value, not something to be given away, traded away, negotiated away, unless we do that, then the meaning of freedom loses its moral content, and it will not have that inspirational, attractive quality that it has for centuries. And I think we owe it, it's our obligation, particularly to the younger generations, that we give very clear signal that no matter what the circumstances are, no matter how bad the situation is, freedom is non-negotiable. Freedom is something that we are going to live with, even when it's being criticized, even when being called irresponsible, for the very simple reason that once you begin to give bits of freedom away, then freedom will be lost. Thank you.